Israel's ability to decisively defeat Hamas is what makes the Abraham Accords possible. Israel being a strong regional superpower that can manage its borders, that's what is admired by the Arab world.
Welcome back, everybody. We're here in the Jerusalem studios of Jewish News Syndicate, JNS.org, with our esteemed guest and friend, Ambassador David Friedman, former U.S. Ambassador to the State of Israel in the Trump administration. Welcome back to Jerusalem.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be with you, and thanks for not wearing a jacket.
Oh, you're welcome. We want to keep it a little bit looser, a little bit more casual, and this way I think we can get a little bit deeper than the typical political talking points that you might find in the other news.
Let's try it. Let's do it.
Yes, I mean, so let's start personal. You know, you have a place here in Jerusalem. You spend a lot of time here, even after you've been the ambassador. You know, why do you keep engaging here with Israel?
Well, I have a daughter here who lives here. I have two grandchildren who live here. I wouldn't be surprised if over time more family members migrate here. I think the main reason why I'm here and keep coming back here is it is really an essential element of my spiritual life. I think that being an observant Jew, I mean, people say you can do that anywhere in the world, just like Christians or Muslims can be good, faithful people anywhere. I don't think you can really fully have the Jewish experience and exercise the Jewish faith without being connected to the land. And so it's really necessary for me as part of my own, kind of spiritual health to be here at least a few times a year.
I've had the privilege of knowing and being friendly with several U.S. ambassadors to Israel, but I would suggest that you were the most effective of all the ambassadors in terms of what you're able to accomplish in a short period here. And that's unique because you did not come from the State Department tree. You know, you weren't part of the foreign policy establishment. You weren't really involved in politics. You were a lawyer. Right. And then, because of your relationship with Donald Trump in legal matters for many years, you found yourself first as his advisor on Jewish affairs. And then sure enough, when he shocked the world by becoming president of the United States, he appointed you ambassador.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're now in a totally different career. Maybe you'd given some thought to what you might do when you were here, but in just a short time, you were able to do what numerous predecessors were not able to do, and you accomplished a great deal for the U.S.-Israel relationship and managed to strengthen the state of Israel immensely in terms of sovereignty over the Golan Heights, sovereignty over the full city of Jerusalem, complete city of Jerusalem, moving the embassy here, and changing the way the United States looked at the settlement enterprise, which is basically suburban housing in the provinces of Judea and Samaria. You know, Jews are Jews because they come from Judea. You understood that, but what did you see when you became ambassador that was going wrong for so many decades, and how did somebody that came from completely outside of the establishment figure out so quickly what to do to make some positive gains in a region that had been so hard to solve for so long?
Well, look, I think my training was actually far more helpful to being an ambassador than anyone who spent a career in the State Department or the national security environment. Look, I lived in the real world. I negotiated deals. I litigated cases. I was forced to make arguments to a judge, which is much more difficult than speaking on a podcast. You know, you're limited to evidence. You're limited to certain levels of decorum and respect, and you learn how to focus and get a judge's attention, which is harder than a normal audience, and to win a case. So, the life experience was perfect for a job that requires diplomatic skills, that requires the ability to negotiate, that requires the ability to make cogent arguments in a relatively short amount of time. So, I would say that that life experience, it's a shame that most diplomats don't get that, and it puts them kind of in a bubble, and they never kind of get out of that bubble, out of that box. When Donald Trump appointed me, he said to me, "Look, my friend, do you want to be an ambassador or do you want to be the ambassador to Israel?" Because you want to be an ambassador, there's lots of nice places around the world. I can put you in Italy. I can put you in Germany. I can put you, in places where you'll put on a tuxedo 3-4 times a week. You'll make great events. You'll enjoy it. People will call you ambassador. If you want to be ambassador to Israel, it's a working job. The odds of you ever putting on formal attire is essentially zero. And you're going to work, and you're working for me, and you're going to work on an agenda. And what do you want to do? And I said, look, no question. I want the job in Israel. And I had an agenda from day one. Like, what's the point?
Were there high expectations when he appointed you ambassador? Did Trump think that something good could come of it?
He thought that I had the skill set to make real progress. Now, his goal was always, I think his first goal was peace. And early on, I think he got some, there were people whispering in his ear that, Mahmoud Abbas was ready to make a deal and Bibi Netanyahu was the problem. And so, the trajectory of the peace efforts, I kind of had to get involved and say, look, I knew this before, but now that I've been here for a while, I know it even better. The Palestinians are not making peace with Israel. Okay, it's not happening. It may happen as a function of them ultimately recognizing the fact that they've been defeated and they can't destroy Israel, but they haven't realized that yet. And so let's move in a different direction on the peace front, which is ultimately, over a series of years, got us to the Abraham Accords. Jerusalem was something that he had made a promise during the campaign. We talked about that at length over the first year. We moved the embassy in May of 2018, but in the first year of before he finished his first year, he had already recognized Jerusalem as the sovereign capital of Israel. So those were things that I think we expected to happen. I mean, when I was appointed, in the press release that appointed me, I was quoted as saying, "I hope to serve my country from its embassy in Jerusalem." So didn't leave any doubt where I was on this thing. And look, I would say the point here, and this goes back somewhat to the life experience, in the government, in life in general, 98% of the world doesn't really care about your agenda, okay? 1% like it and 1% don't like it, right? And everybody else is just kind of watching from the sidelines. And so if you really have an agenda that you think serves the president, serves the interests of the United States of America, and serves the relationship between Israel and the United States, your ability to do it is a question of how strong you are in your beliefs, how skillful you are in your diplomatic efforts, how smart you are in making the right arguments. But you're only making them to about the other 1%. Most people just don't care. I mean, it's not the most important thing to most people in the world. And so once you recognize that, it's not you against the world, it's you against a select group of opponents that, if you work harder and you think more and you prepare more, you're just like when I used to try cases. I always prepared harder than anybody else, thought about it harder than anybody else. If you do that, you're going to win. You just have to be serious and earnest, and you got to work hard. And that was my approach.
Perhaps the biggest and the most transformative accomplishment of all was the signing of the Abraham Accords. It came by total surprise, which I think, to me, that was maybe the biggest accomplishment of all, is how do you do something so transformative on the global stage and nobody knows about it until the day that it's signed. That was just very surprising, especially when Jews are involved.
Yep.
It's hard to keep secrets, but you guys did that. Mm-hmm. But you really charted a new path for the Middle East. And I've always been telling people, when they're asking me about the war here, I say, Israel's been transforming the Middle East, and the way you do it is very simple to define, but it's very difficult to implement. It's two steps. It's
right.
One is defeating the terrorists, and number two is normalizing with the moderates.
Yeah.
But nobody thought that Israel could normalize with the moderates. They'd been engaged in fighting the terrorists. You figured out with a team that actually something different could happen, and you could try to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict from the outside in. How did you set out to do that? How long did it take? What was going on behind the scenes?
Well, that was the goal from early on. I mean, once I think there was some incident in 2017. You can look it up. I'm sure you reported on it, where there were two Druze policemen in the old city who were murdered by Palestinian terrorists, and the weapons came from inside Al-Aqsa. So there was they closed.
That's on the Temple Mount.
Right.
Yeah.
So they closed the mosque for a day. They swept it. They opened it up again. But the security services said, look, we're going to have to put metal detectors or some other form of security apparatus here because we can't allow Al-Aqsa to be a place where weapons are stored or used to, God forbid, shoot down onto the Kotel, the Jewish people. The reaction by the Palestinians to that was so offensive and so difficult, and they turned this into, the classic refrain that they've used for 100 years to incentivize their people to murder Jews. That, the mosque is under siege. The mosque was under siege by Palestinian terrorists, not by Israel, but mosque is under siege. Israel's coming after the mosque. And, I tried for a week or so to work with the security forces and to speak to some of the Palestinians about, enough, quiet this down. This is ridiculous. And what I saw there was such a cynical approach by the Palestinian leadership, the good guys, right? The guys who are supposed to be the better ones, the ones that run the PA. Such a cynical manipulation of Palestinian popular will. And as soon as it was over, I flew back to the States and I sat with the president and said, look, we're giving up. We got to give up on the Palestinians. We can't do anything with them. They are not partners for peace under any circumstance. I saw just now the ugliest manifestation of cynical Palestinian manipulation when it was the Israelis who died, at the hands of Palestinians. They made themselves into the victims.
The victims, right?
So he said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, well, look, that's where we started the whole idea of the outside in. I said, look, we have great relationships with the Gulf. They are moderates. They understand the risk of the Muslim Brotherhood. They fight the same enemies that we fight. And that's how it began. And then, there was lots of discussions about kind of how to surface this undercurrent of a potential agreement. And look, that's, I would summarize it like this. When I after we did the Abraham Accords, I sat down with Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, who's the foreign minister of the UAE, and they really took the lead here. I mean, we've got to give them the credit. And I said, what are you trying to get out of this? What's your? And he said, look, we're all basically fighting the same war, in the Middle East. We're fighting wars not against nations. We're fighting wars against ideologies. We're fighting wars against radical Muslim extremists. And we just have to win. And the Abraham Accords is just the way we win, the way we become the victors in this kind of existential fight for the hearts and minds of the people that we serve.
Well, it's been stated that Iran and Hamas may have launched this war on October 7th specifically to try to foil the impending normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which has always been seen as the biggest potential prize of the Abraham Accords process. If Israel and Saudi would normalize, it would essentially be the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I mean, do you see that? Do you think that the Saudi normalization was a motivating factor behind the attacks of October 7th? And how does Israel's war against Iran and its proxies fit in to the greater thinking of the other countries like the Emirates and Bahrain that have already normalized with Israel?
Look, I think the motivation behind October 7th was hatred. I mean, I don't think it went much further than that. People say, well, why did they do it on October 7th? Why did they do it, during the time when the Saudi normalization was being discussed? And the answer is because they could, because that was the day that Israel let its guard down and they were able to do it. They would have done it any other day that they could have as well, with or without the Saudi normalization issue being on the table. They've been out to kill, dismember, rape, murder Jews for as long as they've been in existence. And Israel let its guard down in ways that are just unconscionable. And, that process will run its course and will hopefully, never face that again. But that's why they did it, because they could. And as far as the Saudi issue is concerned, I don't think people really understand what drives the Abraham Accords or normalization. Israel's ability to decisively defeat Hamas is what makes the Abraham Accords possible. Israel being a strong regional superpower that can manage its borders with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Islamic Jihad, that's what is admired by the Arab world. So, and this is what the Democrats don't get. This is what the Biden administration doesn't get. They thought that by handcuffing Israel, by limiting its ability, to prosecute the war, they were preserving the opportunity for regional peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Just the opposite. When the Saudis saw that Israel could not respond as decisively as it wanted to, that it couldn't win this war and prove to Hamas that they'll never be able to do this again, that this was a failed effort that will result in their destruction, okay, which may still happen, their destruction, but I don't think anybody thought it was going to take 11 months, right? It's all because of America putting handcuffs on Israel. That process did not make the regional issues simpler, made them much more complicated. Okay, what the Saudis want to do is see a strong Israel beating its enemies. That's what makes Israel an attractive partner.
Don't the Saudis express that to the U.S. administration?
Look, in this world, okay, the things that you think and feel and say privately are often very much not in the public sphere. So I'm not sure how that was communicated. I mean, nobody wants to be perceived in the Arab world as being, against the Palestinians, or certainly being in favor of, Palestinian casualties. So there's a limit to how much that can be surfaced. But if you know the region, you know the players, you know that the Saudis are fighting the same enemies. And again, what the Saudis, what the Emiratis, what the Bahrainis, what all the other countries that haven't joined it, what makes them pay attention to Israel is Israel's strength against the enemies that these countries face as well. Okay, you reduce that strength, you reduce the prospects of normalization. This is completely, inverted to where the current administration thinks, which is why they're not making any progress.
You mentioned that the conflict has already been 11 months and that maybe people expected it to go fast. But this is the Middle East. History is very long here. And if you think about the military buildups in Gaza by Hamas and in southern Lebanon by Hezbollah and Iran's line activities, they've been preparing for the October 7th war for years.
Yes, which again addresses the issue with Saudi Arabia, right? It's been going on for years, not just...
Exactly. Yep. And now... Israel's been forced by the United States and the international community to operate in a way which limits civilian casualties. And I think that there's been a tremendous amount of learning by the IDF, where you see from the beginning of the war, as they move on, how much more targeted and effective the attacks get while limiting civilian casualties.
No question.
So if you actually look at the situation today, you could perhaps surmise that Israel's been going very methodically and efficiently and effectively in degrading Hamas's military and political capabilities in Gaza and filing down Hezbollah's capabilities while not causing some kind of major World War III in the region, and also demonstrating to Iran that their attacks, when they sent 300 ballistic and cruise missiles and drones, can all be foiled.
Yeah.
So perhaps Israel's doing better than everybody thought, and the 11 months is not going to really make a difference in the scope of history if Israel comes out on top.
So I agree with that mostly. I think that and let's back up one step. I think that, and unfortunately, I mean, Israel does bear some blame for this, because this happened on their watch. They were watching as Hamas created the greatest home court advantage for ground warfare in the history of the world. I mean, it's a small piece of land, but there's
tiny piece of land.
No piece of land, I don't care how big it is, though, no piece of land tougher to conquer than the Gaza Strip, with 350 plus miles of terror tunnels. There's a tunnel under almost every house. I mean, it's whack-a-mole, and it's just so difficult to operate under that environment. So, look, I'm not saying that, that Israel has, taken too long or performed poorly. But in that 11 months, there's at least 2-3 months that are on America for holding it back. And look, the best example of this, we were talking about this in the car, right? The best example is Rafah, right? All of a sudden, when it got to Rafah, everybody became an expert on Rafah. Kamala Harris.
Well, let's just explain for 1 second. From the beginning of the war, Israel came into the north of Gaza and basically told all the civilians living in Gaza to move south. Of course, with the civilians went terrorists, hostages.
Sure.
But everybody moved to the south, and then at a certain point in the war, you had over or close to 1 million Gazans holed up in the southernmost city of Gaza, which is Rafah, which is right against the Egyptian border. And then Israel realized that if they want to win this war, they have to go into Rafah.
Yeah.
And
well, listen, yeah, they moved people south. That didn't mean that they were comfortable with the security profile of the South. They moved them south because they focused in the north. And the idea would be when they get to the South, they're going to have to move the population someplace else. And, on this, Kamala Harris was very vocal. She said, they have no place to go. You can't move them. You cannot move these people, number one. Number two, I've studied the maps. I have no place to go. I'm working on this thing. And if it happens, and if you do it anyway, it's a huge mistake, and there'll be consequences to Israel.
Well, because they warned that there would be thousands upon thousands of civilian casualties.
So Israel was successful in moving the population to safe ground. Their operations in Rafah were very surgical, but incredibly effective and successful. And had they not gone into Rafah, no question that the war would be lost. No matter how you define a loss, I mean, you can define wins and losses here differently.
Israel found hostages in Rafah. Israel found dozens and dozens.
And the most important thing is they found the smuggling corridors in Philadelphia, which is the way that Hamas would rebuild as a terrorist organization. So the ability to identify those tunnels, to shut them down, to alert Egypt that you got like black market arms trading going on under your nose, and to stop this thing was the most significant military operation of the war. And the United States was telling Israel not to do it, and they held them up by probably over a month. And there were other things where they were held up, and
they were held up from launching a ground operation to begin with.
And look, Sullivan, Austin, Blinken, one of them was in the war cabinet room every 10 days, micromanaging. And with all due respect, Austin has a military career, the other guys don't. They don't know. No one knows how to fight this better than Israel. I mean, it was insane for America to think that they could somehow make an effective contribution to Israel's prosecution of the war, other than providing Israel with ammunition, which, as you know, they were very equivocal about providing different types of ammunition at different times.
I went with the Prime Minister's delegation to Washington when he made the address to Congress just a month ago. He had meetings with President Biden, with Vice President Harris, and with Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump. And I think he came back emboldened from that trip. And you see that Israel did a very harsh strike in Yemen, took out the number 2 of Hezbollah, Fuad Shukr, deep inside Beirut, took out one of the heads of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, deep in Tehran at an Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps facility when he was going there to welcome in the new Iranian president, Pezeshkian. So you see that Netanyahu and the IDF have really and the Mossad have really stepped up their operations. And I think, in a way, I think that Netanyahu, when he met with Biden, he met Harris, and he met Trump, he understood that right now there's a major leadership vacuum in the United States, that there's not a functioning president, that Harris is, maybe whether or not she's up to speed to begin with, but certainly,
I don't think she's up to the task.
But even so, even if she was, she's campaigning for her life right now.
Right.
Trump's not the president as of yet. It looks like it's a 50-50 proposition at best. We don't know how that's going to go. And he understood that there's a vacuum. And if there's a vacuum of leadership in the region, that can be filled by one of two sources. It's either going to be filled by Iran and their terror actors, or it's going to be filled by the state of Israel. And Israel has to raise its game and to go through some of these red lights and do what it needs to do to bring about a fast victory to the war.
Yeah, I think that's I think there's some truth to that, and I think that he came back invigorated, and I think he came back obviously demonstrating to the world through those 57 standing ovations that with all the talk about America and Israel not being on the same page, there's still fundamental hardcore support by America for Israel. The other thing though is Israel's gotten smarter over time. I mean, they just have. The first month or two, I think they were in a state of shock. I mean, this was worse than the beginning of the Yom Kippur War. It was just absolutely terrible, and people were dying, and people were miserable and afraid. And I don't think Israel was at its best in the first month or the first 2 months. And I think, going into Gaza was obviously something they hadn't planned on doing, and they had to create a battle plan. They've gotten smarter, every month. And I think the trend, if you looked at, if you sort of graphed it, I think the incremental intelligence gathering has gone up dramatically over, let's say, the last 3-4 months. Because as things have started to really collapse in Gaza and more people are talking and they're finding more things and they're getting more intel, it's just, kind of exponentially growing the level of intel. I hope to the point where they actually can find the hostages, because I'm not optimistic that they'll ever make a deal for them.
Israel found one yesterday. It was
Yes,
good, a good piece of news. Netanyahu said that this is a 7-front war, right? And obviously we're talking about Iran and the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. But as we're speaking right now, Israel is now involved in a pretty serious multi-day military operation deep inside Samaria, what would be referred to by the international community as the West Bank. A big part of the work that you did was trying to change the way the United States and the entire international community look at this West Bank, which in Israel is referred to as Judea and Samaria. These are biblical provinces. Almost every major biblical story in the book of Genesis takes place in Judea and Samaria. And you, together with your colleague, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, this is actually called the Pompeo Doctrine, recognized that Jewish residence in the biblical provinces of Judea and Samaria is not necessarily illegal under international law.
Right.
And even now, after you've been in office, you've been out for a few years, you continue to focus on Judea and Samaria. You did an incredible documentary that was on TBN and elsewhere about the importance.
Right. Route 60, the biblical highway.
Right. And now you've just come out with a new book. And first of all the stuff that we've talked about in the beginning with the Abraham Accords and everything, you put that together in a great book called Sledgehammer, which is a very smooth read and strongly recommended reading for anybody. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. And now you've just written your second book,
yes,
One Jewish State. So tell us a little bit about One Jewish State and why it's important.
So the motivation for writing One Jewish State was the kind of the world's reaction to October 7th, the horrors of the moment, the fact that credible polling showed that 82% of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria supported the barbaric activities by Hamas, and then the world reaction to all of this saying, just highlights the fact that we need a two-state solution. And you put that all together, and I said, you know what? This is too much for me. I'm going to lock myself in a room for 10 weeks and write another book. And so that's what I did. And One Jewish State is the response to those three things. At the most macro level, the One Jewish State point to the world is, guys, there's 40 plus Muslim nations. There are like 30 combined, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist nations. Can we just have one Jewish state? Is it just too much to ask to have one Jewish state the size
it's
of
really
New Jersey?
big, right? The Jewish state?
Yeah, so one Jewish state the size of New Jersey on land as to which the Jewish people have the best claim to that land of any people anywhere in the world, right? Is it too much to ask? Can you just give us the one Jewish state? And then it goes on to, get more serious and to say, well, look, in the aftermath of October 7th, the way I looked at it when I was in office, everybody was interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, more so probably today. People are, very misinformed, and even those who are informed tend to have their favorite, if I call it a vector, in terms of looking at it. So, you got the vector of national security, you got the vector of human rights, you got the vector of, economics, you got the vector of regional stability that people care about the region generally, and you got the vector of faith, right? People want to see that that God's grant of this land to the Jewish people is observed and maintained. Now, typically, depending on which vector was your most important vector, you had a different point of view, and people would argue about all the different things. What this book says, and what the book argues, and I think I'm right, is that post-October 7th, all the vectors are heading in the same direction. Mm-hmm. They all lead to Jewish sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty over the entirety of Judea and Samaria. And I make the point, look, whether you're secular or you're religious, whether you're Jewish or you're not, whether you're conservative or you're liberal, okay? If you care about the Jews, if you just care about the Palestinians, whatever you care about, however you process information and draw opinions about this conflict, Israeli sovereignty is the best outcome for all.
Let's take a deeper dive, because you said now if you care about the Palestinians, then you think that there should be Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. And for the last 30 years, everybody's been saying that the only way that you make peace between Israelis and the Palestinians is that you give Palestinians not only autonomy, but even some degree of sovereignty over the areas of Judea and Samaria.
Right.
So
why would you engage in that experiment when the Palestinians, in their short history, right? They've only kind of been around since 1964, when Arafat branded, a bunch of tribes, as Palestinians once the Jews, gave up that moniker for the state of Israel. So why would you put smack in the middle of the most sensitive area in Israel, the mountain range that Jews have always lived on because that's how they protected themselves? Why would you take that range, that area, okay, which is also the heart of biblical Israel, the land granted to the Jewish people by God, and give it to a people that have never self-governed, that have no history of self-governance, have no intellectual history of coming up with the means of self-governance, to the extent that they've had the opportunity of limited governments in Area A and Area B, where post-Oslo, the Palestinians were given civilian autonomy. They've been nothing but corrupt. They've not observed any notion of human rights, no notion of freedom of religion, nothing. None of the values that as Americans we hold dear are observed by the Palestinian leadership. And yet America is rushing to put its imprimatur on a Palestinian state that will be a terror state, that will be a corrupt state, that will not be a democratic state. So that that doesn't work.
Right. But we can understand why that doesn't work for Israel.
Right.
But what?
Well, it doesn't work for the Palestinians either, because when I was in office, I spoke to lots of Palestinians. They have no more confidence in their leadership than Israel does. They know what they're dealing with. They're dealing with corrupt people that, look how, the Hania's kids are fighting over like a $3 billion estate. Suha Arafat is running around the Champs-Élysées buying expensive clothing. Even Mahmoud Abbas, who's never done anything in his life, is reported to have, a net worth of over $100 million, and he's flying around in a Boeing business jet, which is a lot nicer than the jet that Netanyahu flies on. So they're out for themselves. They're out for their narrow, self-interests. And you take that point, right, put it on one side. Here's the second point. What country in the Middle East has a history and a track record and a template for empowering an Arab minority? Right? Only one country, Israel. It doesn't get enough credit for it. I think to its fault, it doesn't try to take enough credit for it. You go into an emergency room at Hadassah Hospital, the odds are you'll be treated by an Arab doctor, a good doctor, an educated doctor. You go into a pharmacy, almost guaranteed you're going to have an Arab pharmacist, right? In Haifa, the penetration of the Arab citizens into Haifa University is like 40%. They're only 20% of the population. They're over 20% in Hebrew University, in Tel Aviv University, in Beersheba University. They're educated. They're some of the polling shows they're actually patriotic. They don't want to be citizens of any other country. One of the things we did a little experiment when I was in office. We spoke to some people, in the triangle up in the north, Faham, Baqa al-Gharbia, right up against the Green Line, and places that are entirely Arab communities. And we spoke to some leaders there, privately, and said, look, we're kind of tinkering around with these issues right now. You're entirely Arab, your cities. Would it make sense for us to redraw the Green Line and put you guys on the other side? So, if there were a state of Palestine, you would be part of it. And they looked at me like I had like three heads. They said, are you crazy? Are you out of your minds? We're going to give up Israeli citizenship for being part of Palestine? Are you crazy? So the point is just that, we're convinced. I didn't spend 4 years, just speaking to Israelis, just speaking to my friends. I know that the Israeli Arab population is largely patriotic, very much wants to stay citizens of the State of Israel, and believes that the State of Israel has afforded them opportunities that no other Arab nation would afford. If you could export that philosophy to Judea and Samaria in a way that does not jeopardize the essential Jewish character of the State of Israel, that is a winning formula for everybody.
So what are the main things that need to happen in order to change the paradigm from where it is today, which is this failed Oslo paradigm, which is continuously being pushed by the State Department establishment, by the Europeans, by the United Nations, by every UN institution. How do you change that paradigm when it's so deeply entrenched?
The first thing you have to do, again, maybe counterintuitive to people, the first thing you have to do is to change the mindset of the state of Israel. I mean, because ultimately, I can tell you, if I went to Donald Trump tomorrow, and I talked to him often and said to him, hey, I got a great idea. I think the United States should recognize Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. His first response would be, what do the Israelis want to do? Is that something they want to do? Is that something you want to do? And I can't honestly say right now that's something Israel wants to do. I think some in Israel want to do it. Some in Israel don't want to do it. Most in Israel don't understand how it would be done. So the most important thing, and this is why I don't think this is like this can't be done in the way of the judicial reform movement where, people said, oh, we got 61 seats or 64 seats, let's move. This has to be the subject of a national discussion and a national consensus, which I believe is achievable. But I think the first thing is that, this has to be socialized with Israelis. Nobody talks about this in Israel. Has there ever been a serious discussion in the Knesset about the future of Judea and Samaria, that would include Israeli sovereignty? The issue has been ceded to people who, with all due respect, don't have any credibility on this issue. I mean, it's been conceded to the far right of Israel, who don't have the ability, because of where they sit in the overall kind of national discussion, don't have the ability to make the case. I'll tell you what caused me to believe this is doable. Just one single event. Okay, I'm sitting in Tel Aviv with a high-tech entrepreneur who is a very successful guy and a very smart guy. And there he's wearing a black T-shirt, black pair of pants, classic Israeli secular high-tech garb on the 40th floor of the building, magnificent views. And we're talking business, and then we start talking politics. And I asked him, what do you think about Judea and Samaria? And he says, I haven't been there since I was in the army. I don't want to rule over these people. I don't want my kids to risk their lives. Now I said to him, do you believe in God? He says, I don't know. My parents are Holocaust survivors. I got issues with God. I said, I get it. The guy's a complete patriot, though. I mean,
Sure.
A complete patriot. Loves the country, would never leave the country, but but he's secular. I said to him, so let's talk about this a little bit more deeply. Let's talk about, let's pick a place in Judea and Samaria rather than talking about it so, amorphously. So I picked Shiloh. I said, you know what happened in Shiloh? He said, no. I said, well, look, this was Jerusalem before there was a Jerusalem, right? This is when Joshua brought the Jewish people into the land of Israel. They wandered along the desert for 40 years. They wandered, even in Israel, in a place called Gilgal, and then they came to Shiloh. For 369 years, they lived here. This was the center of,
and that's where the tabernacle was.
The tabernacle was there. They would come 3 times a year for their sacrifices. This is where Samuel, Shmuel, the prophet, was born. One of the 3 most.
He was the one who crowned King Shmuel, and then King David.
He took the crown from Saul and gave it to David. He's one of the 3 prophets who spoke to God. Right? Actually, would speak to God and get an answer, as opposed through these
dreams,
artifices. And this is where Hannah taught the world how to pray. And he right away, what do you mean taught the world how to pray? I said, well, no one prayed at that point. She came into the tabernacle. She wanted a child desperately.
Yeah.
And she sang a song and she prayed.
This is a story we read on Rosh Hashanah.
Yes.
Which is coming up in just a few weeks.
Yes. And the high priest, Eli HaKohen, said to her, are you drunk? Because he never saw this before. So I said, this is Shiloh. And I said to him, so look, I'm not a citizen of Israel. What do you want to do? You're a citizen. You get to make the decisions. You want to keep it or you want to give it away? Now, if you give it away, you just got to tell you, okay, the Palestinians, you're never going to get back, and the Palestinians will destroy every piece of evidence that this was once a holy, ancient Jewish, center.
Probably UNESCO would call it a Palestinian heritage site.
It's gone. It's gone for lots of reasons. I said, so what do you want to do? He says, we have to keep it. I said, we have to keep it. I thought, you don't believe in God. Where'd that come from? He said, well, it's in our Jewish DNA. It's who we are. I said, yeah, but this Bible, why is the Bible more important than the Iliad or the Odyssey or anything else? He says, because it's ours. It's our book. Doesn't matter who wrote it. It's our book. It's the book that has sustained the Jewish people for 3,000 years. It's the reason we're here, and everybody else from that time is gone. Okay? And I said to him, but 10 minutes ago, you didn't care. He says, yeah, because I didn't know. I didn't
Right.
know.
This is a massive failure of Israeli education.
And I said to myself, this guy doesn't know. But he's a brilliant guy. And as soon as, in a 10-minute conversation, it literally took as long as my ability to tell you this just now, he changed his mind. And I said, you know what? If I can express this on a grander scale, the Israeli people will change their mind. I know that they will change their minds. The Israeli people will not give up Shiloh. They will not give up Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. They will not give up Beit El. They will not give up Hebron or Beit Lechem or the Mizbeach, the altar of Joshua. They won't, because it's who we are as a people. It's like asking America to give up the Statue of Liberty or the Washington Monument.
Well, the French gave America the Statue of Liberty.
But it's ours now. We're not giving it back. We wouldn't give it back to the French. There are certain things that are just priceless because they embody the national character of a people. And we have the longest, oldest, most provable national character. So the book, what I found, and this is what I found was interesting. I seem to have an ability, because I'm not from the inside. I'm not Haredi. I don't come across as being deeply religious. I have a secular background. I practiced law for 35 years. I went to Columbia University. I didn't just sit in yeshiva all day long, although sometimes I'd like to, but it's not the best use of my time. People pay attention when someone from the outside who they respect, and I thank God I seem to enjoy the respect in Israel of people on the left, even if they disagree with me.
Because of your track record.
Track record, sincerity, deep love of Israel. I think people see it, understand I'm not doing this for self-gain or anything. And so this book, if you will, is the foundation of something bigger. You start with the book because you can't explain this in sound bites or in, slogans, right? One Jewish State is a great brand. I love it. I'm proud of it. But you need more than that. So this is the intellectual heft that kind of creates the movement. But then we have to create content. We have to speak to people. We have to have events.
And you have a list that you've just entered into the elections for the World Zionist Congress.
So that is. So I am not running for the World Zionist Congress because if if I'm going to get involved in any elections, it's not going to be that. It's going to be something bigger. So I don't want to be in the weeds of that. But there's a movement that agrees with me ideologically that I've allowed to use the name. So there's a One Jewish State party, if you will, and a brand, and all of them, I've said to them, if you want to join, you have to agree with my views, and ultimately, when the book comes out, you got to buy the book and read it, because otherwise you can't be part of this. I'm not, but I believe these are people that really believe the future of Israel has to include Judea and Samaria. So that's the World Zionist Congress side of it.
Well, we're coming up now on a big election, bigger than the World Zionist Congress, 2024 U.S. election, and obviously former President Donald Trump trying to get back into the White House. You had a good track record working with him in his first administration. Is there the possibility that you would work in a second Trump administration?
I would have said if October 7th never would have happened, I would have said to myself, look, you had your 15 minutes of fame, or maybe 4 years of fame. Now go do what you want to do without being a government employee. I don't feel that way anymore. I think there's really a lot of unfinished business and a lot of course correction that is necessary after 4 years of the Biden administration. It's not my choice. It's the president's choice. I think he'll win the election. He'll then build out his team. We are on very good terms. We do speak. I think he knows where I am on issues, and I think trusts me still. I mean, from the last administration, I'm certainly in the top tier of people that came out of that on good terms with him. And we'll see what he has in store for me. I want to continue to help strengthen this relationship, to repair the damage that's been done to the relationship. And I think in the long term, look, we can't keep balls in the air. I mean, balls in the air, people say, well, lots of people used to say to me, well, it's not sustainable for Israel to have this state of limbo in Judea and Samaria. And I would say, well, I don't agree, because it is sustainable, because they've done it and they've managed to become a first world nation. So it's not a question of sustainable. It's a question of what's the best path for Israel. And I think the best path for Israel is to bring home for a landing all these open issues that still remain from the Six-Day War, and to do it on the basis of a national consensus. My tagline when I speak in Israel is, the world will respect Israel when Israel respects itself. In terms of these issues, if Israel kind of goes through a real strategic, well-thought plan for how to assert its sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, it says to the world, this is our trajectory. This is where we're heading. In order to do it, we're going to need X number of years to build this infrastructure, or we're going to need to forge relationships with countries to do it. But this is why it's the best thing. And the Israeli society buys off on it. I think they can make the case. It's way better than, fitting a square peg into a round hole, which is the two-state solution.
Do you see leaders in Israel that you think could galvanize the entire country around this type of platform?
I think properly developed and explained, again, bringing it to the population with respect, with love, with a sense of Jewish pride and destiny. I think it'll.
Well, it's a good platform, but do you see leaders in Israel that are willing to take this platform, run with it?
I hope so. Look, we don't know because it hasn't happened yet. We don't. No one's done it. There have been because of this. There's been a vacuum on this issue. It hasn't been part of serious discussion. In the vacuum, like you say, vacuums get filled. They don't always get filled in the best way. So the vacuum here has been filled by the Israeli right, which has presented this as a win-lose proposition. Israel wins, the Palestinians lose. It's a mistake. There's no reason why this can't be a win-win. Why are we picking fights with people that we're trying to help? We don't want to radicalize any more of the Palestinian population. If we can, we'd like to de-radicalize. Of course, to the extent that they want to kill us, Israel has to kill them first. That doesn't change. The security aspects don't change. But to offer opportunities for these Palestinian population that causes them to be less radical, to absorb them into Israel in a way, again, that very important, that does not jeopardize the Jewish character of the state of Israel. Why is that? The win-win is far better than the win-lose. And that's why I don't think the leadership right now is not in place to make the case. But, I'll keep making the case. I hope the book is going to be translated into Hebrew. I'll work the American side of this. I know that there are senior American, politicians in the Senate that completely agree with this. We got to work Israel, we got to work America, got to work the world, got to have conversations. If what you believe in, if you have a plan, which I believe in good conscience, this is the best outcome for every single human being affected by this conflict, then you can sell it. And that's what I believe.
And we're in the middle of a mess right now, obviously, a war that's been more than 10 months and a feeling that this war is going to continue for however much longer. It could be very fast. I know Donald Trump said,
get it done
fast, but it might not. Mm-hmm. This might drag out as it's already dragged out. But ultimately, it seems like you have some deep-seated optimism about the future of this region.
I do. Look, I think that October 7th was the worst day in Israel's history. I also think it was a wake-up call, and it brought a lot of clarity to issues that had been mired in fog. And, I wish the clarity came at a cheaper expense. Wish we could have gotten that clarity in an easier way, less lethal way. But we have the clarity, and we have to act upon that clarity, and I think the wake-up call was clear. Look, somebody has cancer and doesn't know about it, right? They're not healthier than a person who has cancer and does know about it. In fact, they're less healthy because they can't do anything about it, and the cancer is just eating away at them, okay? We had a cancer, okay? We now know about it. We can deal with it now. We know what we have to do. That's infinitely better than allowing the cancer to just eat up your insides and never seek medical attention. So that's the way I see October 7th. And look, the body language of Hezbollah, they don't want a war. You can make the case that Israel should pursue military action nonetheless to push them back.
And to degrade their capabilities, because they don't want a war now, if Iran becomes a nuclear power and all of a sudden can operate and deter Israel with a nuclear umbrella,
right?
Israel's strategic advantage is to go now.
Could be. And you could also make the case, and I'm not making either case right now because I'm not really close enough to some of the important military considerations to know the right answer, but you can make the case that given how obviously afraid Lebanon is of a war, the United States could succeed in pushing back the Hezbollah forces to a sufficient buffer zone, create the type of buffer and physical barriers that let people go back to Kiryat Shmona and sleep at night, and then I think Trump can come in, bankrupt Iran, impose sanctions and expand the Abraham Accords, and in months could literally change the entire profile of the Middle East. So, if I have the opportunity to be part of that, it's an opportunity I would never give up.
Meanwhile, the book is One Jewish State. People can buy it on Amazon.
One Jewish State is available everywhere people buy books, including Amazon. It's One Jewish State, the last best hope to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's the full name of the book, and it's on Amazon, and it's everywhere else. And I hope people read it. I just say, Alex, people see the title, like I'm watching just on the social media. People who haven't read the book because they can't read the book yet because it's not out yet, they're already referring to it as, the book in favor of apartheid. And it's the farthest thing from apartheid. And, this audience, those people who think it's a good idea, will love it. But the people that are questioning about it, read it with an open mind, because, this hasn't been raised as seriously as it should. But the immediate goal of this book, okay, is not sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. It's complicated. The immediate goal of this book is that whenever somebody talks about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this is on the table as an alternative alongside the two-state solution. We have to bring this, we have to elevate this, so this can be a discussion that can be held in polite company as a serious proposal. Because right now, nobody will take it seriously. They have to read the book with an open mind, and hopefully people will take it seriously and we can make progress on it.
The book is One Jewish State. We're sitting here with former U.S. Ambassador to the State of Israel, David Friedman. Thank you so much for being with us here at JNS.
Alex, thank you. Always a pleasure. And good luck with your efforts here. I can see how you're growing and developing, and it's important. JNS does a real important service to the Jewish community.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.